can actually type in your own question on the top right-hand side where it says add a question here, and then hit the add button, and our moderator will go through it to make sure that it's accurate and we're able to understand it accurately. You can also view this on YouTube and subscribe to be able to get updates when they come out as well. If you're watching it on you, or if you're watching it on Ruby, it's always going to be on the top right hand side for your live events. And we do have feedback too, if you would like to hit the feedback button under the attendees to be able to take surveys for any of the live events you see. You can take those as we're doing the live event, or you can take them afterward as well too. If you'd like to search old events, you can always go to the search icon on the top right hand side as well. And then you can search other events and or different recipes that you want to find in there as well too. So let's get started on some of our questions here that have been written in by our students. The first one is from Maria. Any tips on making yummy kale chips? Yeah, actually, Maria, I make kale chips pretty often. My kids actually love them as well. Typically, what I do for kale chips is I'll actually soak cashews. I usually do it overnight and then drain off the water, and then blend them up with the seasonings or the flavors that I want to do. And I'll kind of switch up the flavors depending on my audience. Like if it's my kids, I might do something just a kind of a simple like lemon juice and garlic, or I might do something that kind of replicates like a ranch, like a dried ranch, to be able to put into it as well. But I kind of switch all those up a little bit. And then what I'll do is I'll take my kale and I make sure to bring it into, kind of chip sized pieces. So relatively small, and you want to make sure to get the stems out of them. So you can just grab the stem and then put your fingers like this, and it'll pull the stem right off of the leaves as well. And then I put the kale into a bowl, and then I'll mix in the cashew cream and really hand massage it into it all. And then afterward, I'll put it into a dehydrator. Usually, it takes about 24 hours into dehydrator at about 160. I do know people that make them in the oven as well too. You just want to keep it at a very low temperature, almost as low as your oven can go. Or if you have a gas stove, some people just use the pilot light on it. Depending on how long, it can take kind of a long time just to the pilot method. So I actually love using the dehydrator. So that's usually what I do for kids. For adults, I might add something like chipotle powder, or maybe even something like truffle powder, or something like that into it as well too. For adult flavor profiles as well. But a little bit of acid, like a lemon juice, goes a long way in it. It actually helps to be able to keep the bitterness away from it, and then the cashews add a nice fat to it as well, and kind of help to add some of that crunch to it. So I hope that helps, Maria. The next one here is from Afik. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. My julienne cuts are still off, and my cubes aren't perfectly square. Are you relying on visual judgment, or is there a trick to improve accuracy? So this is actually a common question I get because I do a lot of the grading for knife skills, and it takes years and years of practice to be able to get your knife skills perfect, where you can actually make your cubes perfectly square and your juliennes and bâtonnets exactly perfect on each side and the length that you're desiring. There is actually a tool that Mercer has that I recommend, and I put a link for it down here, to a little stainless steel kind of ruler. And you can click on the link here. But if this little ruler basically has the small dice, the medium dice, and the large dice kind of cut out of it, so you can literally put it right up to what you're cutting to make sure that it's getting accurate. Then it has the sizes for the julienne and the bâtonnets as well in there too. So that's actually a really good way to be able to just kind of keep that on your cutting board when you're practicing, to be able to get it to the exact measurements you're looking for. Now, this again is for something, if you're in a very high-end kitchen where it's something that's, kind of demanded of you, but at a home cook, it's not as important. When we're talking about getting equal sized pieces for cooking, generally equal sized pieces is okay. When we're going up to that the higher scale of fine dining, that's when you want all your cuts to be exactly precise. And for our professional classes, we are judging on those for our classes too. So I highly recommend getting one of those little rulers. They work very well. I use them in courses all the time, or when I'm teaching live, just to be able to use as a representation and an easy guide for people. I've also seen different cutting boards that have like ruler setups on them and different sizes on them, which is great to be able to do. So again, just remember lots of practice on them as well. So it's something that's going to take time. I still know people that have worked in restaurants for years and years that can't get their dice exactly perfect, but they're great cooks, you know. So keep at it, just keep the practice going, and definitely use a visual representation to help yourself. All right, Julie. What are your favorite vegan dishes for sharing with non-vegans? That's a great question. And it really kind of depends on how non-vegan they are, right? So a vegetarian versus a full-on meat eater. If there's somebody who's, just is like, I don't like vegetables at all, or some people, that I know that are like, they don't consider it a meal unless there's meat on the plate. For some of those, I'll actually do meat substitution. So I'll do an analog basically of it as well. So it might be where I'll serve them something like a crab cake. That's one of the recipes I put into Plant Based Pro, where it's hearts of palm and garbanzo beans. And you basically kind of mix them all up with the ingredients and then put them in the oven to be able to get the crust on the outside, which is really nice. You serve that over some arugula with, a vegan tartar sauce. You can make really easily. So that's kind of like one of those winning ones. I might go for other analogs too. So, the carrot lox is a really popular one for people for brunches. I might actually do some other ones. It really kind of depends on the audience and what the season is as well too. I just more recently made some chili and put in some textured vegetable protein into it to be able to mock the kind of ground meat that's in a lot of chilies for somebody that was coming over for chili, and they are very meat forward, and they loved it. It might not be something I would normally put in my chili if I'm eating at home, but for that case, it worked out really well. You can also do other kinds of things like seitan as an analog would be really good as well too. But there are also certain dishes that you can do that don't have like the meat analog, where it's just a really good vegan dish that everybody would like. And I usually try to kind of steer towards that, where people just don't even realize that there's no meat in the dish. I'll do that a lot of times with different, kind of noodle dishes, like a peanut sauce with noodles and tofu. There are a lot of kind of different versions of things for those. So those are a couple examples, but it really kind of depends on the guest and what their eating style is. But I try to go something, I look for something that I know that they like and try to do something kind of in that wheelhouse, just using it vegan instead. Yolanda, what are the best knives to use? We get this question quite often, Yolanda, and I always tell people the best knife is the one that feels best in your hand. So, what I recommend is going to a store that sells knives. You can go to, like a Williams Sonoma or like a sur la table or something like that, where they actually have knives out for people to test out and hold each one in your hand and see what it feels like in your hand. I think it's a really good way to be able to get a basis for that. Now, if you're like at near a big box store or something like that, like a Walmart or a Target, they usually have some of those in their home sections where the knife is usually packaged, but you can feel the handle on it. It's another great way to be able to kind of judge on that as well too. So that's probably my best bet to be able to tell you on the best knives to use is the one that's most comfortable for you in your hand. Now, every chef, every instructor here will tell you probably a different knife that they use. I use a lot of different varieties of knives myself. At home, I use Wusthoffs when I'm doing cooking jobs. I'm using Shun knives. I'll use Mercer knives as well too. So it really kind of depends just on the situational use for it, and kind of what feels best to you. I hope that helps a little bit, Yolanda. Sue, hi, Chef Dan. How does coconut yogurt last in the fridge, and can it be frozen or used in baked goods? So coconut yogurt in the fridge, yeah, it lasts fine in the fridge as long as it's well covered. You want to make sure that there's no air getting to it. So if you make it yourself, I usually put um, like a cellophane or paper or the cling wrap or whatever it is, basically down inside of a Tupperware and kind of tuck it down and then put the lid on it to make sure that no air is getting to it. And that, should last, a while. You usually say 6 to 7 days, something like that. It absolutely can be frozen. But coconut yogurt is when it freezes, it's really hard. So don't expect to be able to scoop it out like an ice cream or something like that. My daughter loves freezing her yogurt like that, but it takes her about 20 minutes to eat her yogurt after she's done it because you have to kind of scrape off little pieces of it to be able to eat. Can it be used in baked goods? Absolutely. Depending on what is in it. If you're using something like a blueberry yogurt, you might want to watch out, kind of cooking times and stuff like that. But a plain yogurt can absolutely be used in baked foods as well, too. All right, here's another one from Sue. Should I add brine solution to the apple cabbage kraut if it's getting dry? And how long does it last in the fridge? Yeah. So if your kraut is sticking above the line of the liquid, the brine solution, that's not great. So typically, you want to try to put a weight on top of the kraut. Maybe make little glass ones or stone ones that you can put on top of it to be able to make sure that it weighs down before inside the liquid of the kraut. So if you have to add more brine solution, definitely do that. But you want to make sure that it is covered so it is actually safe to be able to eat. How long does it last in the fridge? A long time. Most sauerkrauts can last a very long time in the refrigerator because it's a fermented food. You're refrigerating it slows that fermentation down dramatically as well too. So they usually last quite a long time in the fridge. I would say I've had a kraut in the fridge for at least 6 months before, and it was just fine as well. Just going to get funkier and funkier tasting, just to give you a heads up on that. Connie, the Forks Over Knives cooking class has a recipe for faux stock, which includes 4 star anise, a teaspoon of whole cloves, a stick of cinnamon. If I double the recipe, do I also double these ingredients? That's a great question, Connie. So, a lot of times for spices, especially ones that are so strong, like star anise and cloves and cinnamon, if you double the amount of ingredients in it, it's going to taste a little off. And I would agree with this one, the pho. So I wouldn't put as much in there. I would probably start with the 4 and the teaspoon of clove and the stick of cinnamon, double the recipe, and then be tasting it as you go. And if it tastes like it needs a little bit more, I would add more. And I would probably guess you might end up around 5 to 6 star anise, and then maybe a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of whole cloves, and the 1 stick of cinnamon probably will keep it going just fine as well too. So it's going to take a little bit of experimentation to get it perfectly right, but I would start with the base. You double all your other ingredients, but as far as those 4, I would just keep it as what they are and then taste to be able to get the flavor profile you're looking for. Hope that helps, Connie. All right, Diane. I got some yellow turmeric tofu because it's high in calcium, but it was vacuum packed in plastic. I worry about plastic, but water packed tofu also comes in plastic. What's the best way to buy tofu? Yeah, Diane, every tofu block that I've ever bought has come in a plastic bin of some sort. So it's either come in a plastic, thing that you can recycle, or just shrink wrap plastic in it around it as well too, like the drier ones that aren't in water. So that is definitely, if you're trying to stay away from plastic, that's going to be a little bit hard. Now, tofu's, you can make it at home. It's actually just a pretty easy process. You can buy a tofu press or make one yourself to be able to make something like that as well. Those are typically made out of plastic, but you can definitely get stainless steel ones as well too. So by and large, most tofu is going to come in a plastic, though, just so you know, unless you're starting to make it at home. There are a couple very specialty makers around the country, and definitely overseas, that will, put it in glass containers or something a little different too. But yeah, so you can look up different recipes to be able to make tofu from scratch, and you can absolutely add, turmeric to that if you'd like to. All right, I'll move on to the next one. Another one from Diane. In a New Orleans cooking class, I heard that they waste nothing. Is there any value or any adverse effects to adding vegetable peels, even onion peels, to stock? No, actually, I do that all the time. So every time I cut an onion and I take the peel off, I put it into a gallon Ziploc bag and save it for stock. I put it in the freezer actually, and then every time I'm peeling carrots, I'll put my peels in there as well too. Same with the bottoms of celery or the leafy tops of celery. I'll always put those into it as well. Things that I won't save for my stock are things like you know I don't know, like garlic peels or beet peels, things that will kind of alter the flavor of the stock too dramatically. But I'll put mushroom stems and, like I said, the other ingredients before too. But I use a lot of those things just in a stock bag, so that way, about once a month, during soup season, maybe a little bit more, I'll make a huge batch of stock to be able to have in all kinds of different cooking. Everything else I put in the compost instead. So if you're looking to waste nothing, that's a great way to do that. If you have a house, you can have a compost outside really easily. If, you don't have a backyard or something like that, they do make home composting, kits that work pretty well too. And you can use it for house plants or even growing a little window box full of herbs. All right, Mark. I've been trying to get into steaming my veggies and wondering if it's appropriate to add herbs and spices to it while steaming, and if a mixture of vegetables, potatoes, and beets at the same time is doable. Okay, so a couple different questions there. Adding herbs and spices to it while steaming. So you can do that. You can definitely add spices and herbs to it as you're steaming. It will absorb a lot of that flavor. So, like, say if you're doing potatoes in particular, right? So if you have potatoes that you're steaming, you can, salt them and maybe put like dill fronds on top of them, and they will absorb some of that flavor as well. It's definitely going to get a little bit more flavor after you've steamed and you've diced that dill basically and toss the potatoes into it because you're actually eating the dill and not just steaming it with. So if you're looking to get a big flavor, definitely dice it and toss the herbs and spices, after steaming. Although it could absorb a little bit as you're going. Now, if you're looking to be mixing vegetables, potatoes, and beets at the same time, you have to worry about cooking time and how dense the vegetable is. And beets, you have to worry about touching other things and turning things purple. So you have to have a lot of room um, if you're going to do that, and you need to make sure that the beet juice doesn't drip down on the other ingredients, turning the colors different colors. So depending on how dense the vegetables are that you're steaming and the potatoes, if they're, cut up or if they're just whole or however you're doing them, those are all things that you have to consider is are they going to take the same amount of time to cook? And if they're not, then you need to be able to add things into your steamer at the appropriate time. It's kind of like a stir fry, right? So when you're making a stir fry, you put the ingredients you want cooked the most in first and the ones that you want least at the end, right? So you start with your onions and your ginger and your garlic and your mushrooms and maybe your tofu. And then some of the lighter ingredients, like maybe snow peas, would kind of go in towards the end because they don't need to be cooked down as much because you want them to have a little crispness to them. You do the same thing with the steaming. If you're going to be doing a lot of different vegetables, you kind of add them as you go. So you might put your potatoes and your carrots in to be able to start on the steam, but something that you don't want is, cooked all the way through or something less dense. You would put it in towards the end. Another one from Mark here. What healthier alternatives can be used when a recipe calls for sugar and similarly when a recipe calls for oil? So it depends on the recipe, Mark. Like if you're just doing a saute, you can definitely do like a vegetable stock or a water to be able to use instead of the oil. If you're trying to get it to do non-stick, water deglaze will actually work for that as well too. For sugar, there are because sugar is so processed, that's one of the reasons we try to kind of stay away from it a little bit more. So try to think of less processed sugars that'll actually work for you. Now, this is kind of a slippery slope, though, right? So, if you can do things like where you're adding like a fruit into your dish to be able to get the sugar quality, that's the best option because you're getting your whole fruit. It's not been processed down at all. And then you're getting your sugar, your sweet from something like that. So if you're, looking for something to be able to kind of mix into that, that could be great. So if you're making something like pancakes, you can add actual blueberries to the pancakes to be able to make that sweeter, the sweetness to that that's not, altered that much. Now, there is an argument that maple syrup is actually probably, not as processed as so like a cane sugar would be. Which I can agree with as well too. If you're, not vegan, honey is something that a lot of people like to be able to use, and agave. But agave is also pretty processed as well too. So when people are trying to avoid sugar, I always try to tell them go towards the whole ingredient. Dried fruit is probably the one place that I go to most often. So something like a date is something that I use, or dried apricots. Both of those things dried, I'll soak them a little bit and then blend them up into a blender, and you have a fruit paste that you can use as a sugar alternative that works really, really well. Diane, I just did the stock soup activity and was wondering what to do with the vegetables used for the stock. Although they lost flavor and water soluble vitamins, they still have fiber and other nutrients. Yes, you are right on that, Diane. But by and large, they have lost most of their nutrients and most of their flavor. So you absolutely can do something if you want to. Usually, I put them in the compost, to tell you the truth, after that, because you're not getting the full flavor out of them. It's all put into the stock. That's why you're using them in that method as well too. But go ahead if you want to add them into something else. I've known other students to be able to like puree them in a blender or something and make them into a sauce. All those things can be done. Just remember, they're not going to have as big a flavor as you would if you just use those ingredients to start. If you just like steam them and put them in a blender, it's going to be a much bigger flavor out of those. So yeah, primarily when I'm done making a stock or soup, I'm going to compost the vegetables afterward as well. But if you want to do something else with them, you're more than welcome to. Melissa, how did you get started in the industry, and what are some of the important things that helped you out in your path? Um, wow, that's a kind of a long story, but I basically started. Huh, how do I make this short? I started at a grocery store. I started as a dishwasher at Whole Foods Market in Austin, Texas. It was my first job in the industry. Quickly worked my way up to a waiter, and then was a waiter for about a month or two. And then when the chef would go out for his cigarette breaks, I would take over cooking, and the clientele ended up liking my food better than the chef. I'd been cooking a very long time on my own for probably 20 years before that as a vegetarian. My mom used to have a catering business when I was a little kid, but for 20 years didn't before that. But I learned to cook pretty early because of that. So once I got into that restaurant thing, they hired me as a chef, and then I kept increasing from there. And it was a restaurant inside of a grocery store in Austin, Texas, at the headquarters for Whole Foods. It's no longer there anymore, but it used to be a vegan and raw cafe. That's when I first met Chad Sarno, who helped develop the plant-based pro course as well too. Um, and then moved on to other things basically in the industry. So had had done a lot of different things since then, but that's how I first got into it. So what are some important things that helped me out in my path is just listening. Working in a kitchen with other people, I think is like if you're looking to do it professionally, you need to pay attention and learn from everybody around you. And I think that going into situations with open ears, and open eyes is very important. You're there to learn. Working with Ruby is great, and that's going to get you on that path as well too. But once you're actually working in a location at a restaurant, it's always good to talk to your peers and learn as much as you possibly can from that situation. All right, Tony, what is the plant-based milk you use to make butter, and do you have to add oil to it? So I've made a couple different plant-based butters. There's one that's in our plant-based pro course that I came up with, and there's one in the Plants Plus course. And I think that we're using almond milk in that. And we use coconut oil as well in that one. But I'd have to look up the recipe for it. So there are a lot of different ways to be able to make plant-based butter. That one with the coconut oil is one that I've done before. It is a little bit of a laborious process. So I do have to say I usually buy mine instead. And I buy it depending on what the use case scenario is. Like I'll buy one kind if I'm doing something like, putting it on a bagel, or and I'll buy a completely different kind if I'm using it for baking, just because it has a different consistency to it as well, too. But you can do a quick search up in our search, and you'll probably find the plant-based butter if you're in the plant-based pro course. Here's another one from Melissa. What are some ways that you found to use your plant-based culinary knowledge and skills for income? Well, that's another long story because I've got a very long career of doing all kinds of things using my plant-based culinary knowledge. So, after I worked at that grocery store, well, as I was working there, I was helping to develop recipes for the restaurants, and then continued on to develop plant-based recipes for Whole Foods Market as a company, and then helped develop recipes for books. And then I became a healthy eating specialist. So I helped the community basically look at food in a healthier way and whole food plant based eating. And this was 20 years ago. So this is quite a long time ago. Worked with, the Esselstyn's at Engine 2 and Dr. Furman and Dr. Greger and Scott Stoll, kind of all these heavy hitters in the plant-based industry then. Worked with them quite regularly to be able to help develop recipes and make healthy eating taste good, because that was something that was not, people thought of healthy eating and they thought of things that didn't taste good. So I really emphasized working on food that everybody liked, so it was like you didn't realize you were eating health food. I then took that, in other directions. I worked in school food for a while, developing plant-based, meals for schools and large mass to be able to help out with Chef Ann Foundation out of Boulder, Colorado. I worked with Whole Kids Foundation, specifically doing the school food and training teachers on best practices in nutrition. I've been on countless boards as well. So right now I'm on the REAP Food Group board here in Madison, Wisconsin. I was on the board of Slow Food for 8 years, somewhere around there. A lot of different ways to be able to help with my plant-based culinary knowledge. I've taught at countless culinary schools across the country as well, and done talks at different conferences, all kinds of different things, using my plant-based culinary knowledge for income. All right, Yolanda, what's the best cookware to use? So that's another kind of open-ended question, but um, I wouldn't say that there's a best one to use. I usually tell people to try to focus on stainless steel if you can. Stay away from aluminum. Aluminum can basically, put different toxins into your food. So try to stay away from aluminum completely. Stainless steel is definitely the way to go. If you need a non-stick surface, go with a non-stick skillet or something like that, but don't get like a non-stick like soup pot or something like that. Try to keep it stainless steel. As far as brands go, I'm not going to tell you a specific brand because everybody has a different favorite, and there are different prices on different favorites too. Cookware can be, relatively inexpensive to get into, but can also be very cost prohibitive. So look for something within your price range and try to keep it stainless steel. Tony, so I know when cooking asparagus, we chop off the ends, but can those ends be used to make veggie broth, or would it be too strong of a taste? It will absolutely be too strong of a taste. And for the ends, a lot of people cut too much off of asparagus. You don't have to cut a whole lot off; just cut a little bit off of it. And what Chef Jacques Pepin says to do is use a peeler and peel the ends of it as well, because what you're trying to do is get rid of the woodiness on that asparagus. So just chop off the very end of it, and then you can peel the end, and you get a nice tender asparagus the whole way. But definitely don't use the scraps in veggie broth because it will overwhelm the broth. Yeah, I can't think of a single use case that I would use that for. If you're looking for something specifically to have asparagus flavor, you totally can, cook it down and maybe blend it with some peas or something like that for a sauce. But I wouldn't use it in a soup. All right, Mitch. Hi, Chef Dan. Can you speak a bit about home veg broth? What are your favorite veggies to add? What veggies do you not add? How long do you simmer? Can you refreeze and not use any not used? And do you need to filter it? So let's start at the beginning there. So favorite veggies to use, I always just use my scraps. You can definitely custom build your stock for a use case. So if I'm doing like if I'm doing a mushroom gravy, right, for a holiday thing, I'll usually use mostly mushrooms in it. I'll use onions and mushroom. I might add a bay leaf and maybe some thyme at the end of it, but I'll specifically use those. And I'll use dried shiitakes. I'll use mushroom stems that I've saved and frozen as well too. But by and large, most of the time, I'm using onion scraps. So like the outsides of the onions and the skins. I'll use the internal core and then kind of the top of peppers. I'll use celery, like the bits on it. I'll use the scraping, like the peels from carrots as well too. And then I'll always have the mushroom, bottoms, and I even usually put dried mushrooms, like shiitakes or something, into my broth as well. Those are my main kind of go-tos, or the scrapped ones, to be able to do that. And if I want to blend, you know, do something more to it, I can. But I kind of keep that very simple and just as that. I'm not adding anything else into it because I can always add it when I'm cooking something. Like if I'm going to turn that into a certain style of soup, I can kind of take it in that direction. But that's usually my base. What veggies do not add, so very pungent things, right? So the asparagus is a great example of that. Garlic, garlic turns very bitter when you're overcooking it. So things that are very pungent, you want to keep out of it. Things that will discolor, like beets, right, or beet scraps, so just turn everything red. Same with cabbage. Cabbage is too pungent as well, so I wouldn't put the cabbage in there either. Uh, how long do I simmer? I usually cook my stock long. I'll usually cook it for about an hour and 20 minutes. And what I do is I bring it up to a boil, and as soon as it boils, I bring it all the way down to a very low simmer. I'll do that for about an hour to an hour and a half. And that plus or minus is you can see just by the color of it how it works. And then I will strain it off. I basically put it, over a chinois, over a jar, basically, or a couple big jars, and then strain it off into that as well too. So you can filter it through like a cheesecloth or something like that if you want it to get very clean. I don't usually worry about that much as much, but if you're in a fine dining restaurant, you need it to be as clean as you possibly can. So you can filter it off. I don't mind just a little bits, of fiber in it as well too. I freeze it? Yes, I will freeze it and make it into ice cubes basically. So you can, if you're not using it, you can put it into ice cubes. I usually have like kind of the bigger cubes that I'll freeze. Um, and then you can just add it to different things as you need to. You can add it into a dish and let it, thaw out and kind of melt down, depending on how you need it. All right, so Mishka, I want to start adding more raw vegetables into my diet. I have the usual carrots, cucumbers, broccoli, etc. But can you introduce me to more options to make things more exciting? Yeah. So I used to play this game with people all the time: is go to the grocery store and find a vegetable every time you go grocery shopping. Find a vegetable you've never heard of, and then Google it and look for a recipe to use that. I With raw vegetables, that's great because you can actually do the same thing. One that my kids have recently started to love is jicama. Jicama is in the apple family. So it's kind of like nice and crunchy, has the same kind of a texture as an apple, but it's not sweet. It's very kind of a bland flavor. So what I'll do is I'll peel that and then cut it up into like French fry kind of shapes. And then I'll add lime and a little bit of chili powder to it, or chipotle, depending if it's for the adults. But that's a great one to try is jicama. Um, Trying other raw vegetables. So just going outside your carrots and cucumbers and broccoli. Just try the variety that's out there. You'll be surprised at how many fun things you can find out there. On the raw end, there's certain ones that I wouldn't do, like like potatoes and stuff like that. But there are some that you can eat actually raw too. Like beets is actually one of those. You can eat beets just raw as well. You just need to cut them down really well too. I'm not sure if you consider fermentation raw as well, but that's another way to be able to get a lot of cool vegetables into your diet too. But the biggest thing I'm going to tell you though is pick out different things at the grocery store that you might not have tried before or you haven't tried in a long time. Look for new ways to explore food and the flavor profiles that come along with them. So if you see something that just kind of sparks your interest, look for a way to be able to use it. And just try it the one time. So you're not spending a fortune on it. You're not throwing a bunch of food away. Just do it every time you go to the grocery store. Look for a new vegetable that you've never tried before and give it a shot. Mitch, hi Dan. I made a fruit salad recently, but the bananas and apple flesh turned reddish. It did have strawberries in it, but I added acid, lemon, and lime, and wonder if the acid caused the discoloration. So probably it's the reddishness. I'm wondering if that could have been from the strawberries and it just kind of leached over into it. Sometimes apple, when it's turning color, it can have like a reddish hue to it, but it's usually a brownish hue. So that's why I think it might be the strawberries that actually just kind of leached over into that as well. The lemon and lime should have prevented the discoloration of the apple. So that's why I'm probably guessing it's probably just because discoloration from the strawberries on it. Diane, a while ago, I had tried replacing meat with seitan tofu in a recipe, and it was awful. H Now I'm afraid to try seitan again. Should and how could I give seitan a second chance? So, what I would recommend, Diane, is going to a place that makes tofu, that has or makes seitan. So seitan and tofu are two completely different things. Tofu is um, basically made out of soybeans or edamame, and that's the sole ingredient. Seitan is made out of a wheat gluten, typically, which is basically if you're washing flour, you can basically get rid of everything but the gluten that's inside, and it's kind of this kind of bread dough looking kind of a thing. Um, and that's basically what seitan is made of. Now you can alter the flavor profiles of both of those things. Now, what I would recommend is going to a place that serves one of those things. Go to a restaurant that has maybe a seitan Reuben. I don't know what part of the country you're in, but try to find something that where somebody's actually using seitan or tofu, if that's what you want to do, and they're using that in a recipe already existing. So that way you can get kind of a good idea of what it's supposed to taste like when somebody else prepares it. That way you have your basis of understanding and you can go home and try to replicate something like that, or at least try to replicate something, in that flavor profile. Like doing a seitan Reuben might be a little hard to be able to start off with, but you could do like a seitan bratwurst or something like that at home to be able to change that up. And usually if you're, just replacing meat with seitan, you might want to try some of the recipes that you did with meat using seitan instead. So you could do a sausage, but use, like maybe a Polish sausage recipe you used to use before, or an Italian sausage recipe you used to use before. You could do something like beef bourguignon, but use the seitan as well. So, cooking down the wine and all the, the carrots and everything else as well in that too. Really a great dynamic dish that seitan works well in. Now, if you're just eating seitan on its own, it's not going to be very rewarding. It's not like, if you're just eating like a piece of breakfast sausage, it's not quite the same as just eating a piece of seitan sausage. You can add flavor to it and people will like it like that, but it's definitely going to be a little bit different. And you shouldn't expect a one to one. It's not going to taste exactly like the meat. And quite honestly, it's probably going to make you feel a little bit different than the meat. Well, because where the meat might make you sluggish and stuff like that, a lot of seitan, so a lot of wheat gluten, might not be the best option for gut health at the same time too. So explore with a couple different things, but try seitan on at a restaurant setting to be able to kind of get your basis of understanding to see what works best for you. All right, hope that helps, Dan. And that concludes our talk for today. Thanks so much for joining us for the office hours. And hopefully, we'll see you again soon. Happy cooking.